Press.
Okay. Okay. Well, I hope everybody can hear me okay. I've got the webinar ready to go. We're just waiting for a couple of people. And I'll fill you in one moment. I've just got a technical issue here, which I'll sort out right now. And let's have a look. There we go. Okay. Well, good evening. So far, we have George Christensen, of course, former MP from Queensland, and we've got Senator Alex Antic from South Australia. Joining us shortly will be, hopefully, Matt Canavan and Ralph Babette. What I'd like to do is just to make sure that all those people that are on the webinar, that you feel free to look at the chat button at the bottom of your screen. You can type in questions in there if you wish, and you can also ask questions, but they won't be till we get into the Q&A session. So please make sure that you know the questions are short, respectful, and of course aimed at the topic. So what we'll do is we'll kick it off in just 1 second. If I just want to double check that I've got everything in order here, and I have. Okay. All right. Well, welcome to you, Senator Alex Antic. I think it's wonderful that you've managed to join us, because this is one of the most important bills to come out of Canberra, in my opinion, for quite some time, which was originally, of course, initiated by George Christensen. What I'd like to do is tonight is, of course, I'll get both of you to make a comment, and then when Matt Canavan comes on board and Ralph, they can have a few words as well. What I'd like to do is, of course, start off with George. You're the instigator of the original initiative bill. Now, I know that, George, that you've got a wonderful background there with the green zone, so you look very professional. George, welcome. Good to see you again. This is a wonderful topic in the sense that we need to make sure that it gets addressed. So, George, please introduce yourself and take it and do an introductory commentary for us, please.
Well, thank you very much, Greg. And just first of all, just checking the audio is okay.
You're a little bit blurry on the volume. Can you just have a check on that for me?
Yeah, let me just see if I can come in and fill you with that a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, is that a bit better or not better?
Look, we can hear you, George. Let's go with it.
Okay, apologies. That's a bit well, first of all, I'll keep it fairly brief because I'm the has-been here, but it is just absolutely fantastic and phenomenal, Greg, that people with the calibre of Senator Alex Antic, Senator Matt Canavan, Senator Ralph Babette, and I know that there's others that are supportive as well of this legislation, have picked it up and run with it again. You're not wrong to say that the Born Alive, Children Born Alive Protection Bill is one of the most important pieces of legislation that has been before the Parliament. The left and those who are pro-aborts will tell you that there's no need for this bill on the one hand, and on the other hand, they scream no matter about what the bill might do. Well, they can't have it both ways. The reality is there is a need for it because I know, as so many other people know, that across Australia in different jurisdictions, there are babies that are actually born alive in hospitals, abortion clinics, that have been born as a result of an abortion procedure that's obviously gone wrong. We would probably say gone right, as the case may be, because no child should die at the hands of an abortion. But these babies are born alive. In some cases, particularly with the advent in different states of late-term abortions, in some cases these babies may be viable. And where they are viable, in other words, where they could potentially survive with medical assistance, they should be offered that medical assistance. But at the moment, what doctors and those attendants tend to do is just simply discard them almost as medical waste. And that is quite shocking. In fact, it's not just what doctors may do, it's systemic. The Queensland Health guidelines on the termination of pregnancies actually has a tabular format of things that could potentially happen during a termination procedure or an abortion, as we call it, in normal language rather than bureaucratic speak. But one of them is, it says, what happens if a baby's born alive? And the answer to all treating physicians and treating health professionals is to simply let the baby die. It actually explicitly says, do not offer any intervention. Do not offer any potential life-saving intervention. So that tells you that this problem is systemic. And is the problem? Well, of course, us that believe that life is sacred, including life in the womb, we believe that that is a problem. But actually, the life is then outside the womb once it's born, and there are treaties, and I hate to be one that invokes international treaties because I normally hate them, but hey, if they're left to play by the sword, let them die by the sword on this issue. There's treaties that we've signed up to that talk about the right to life, the right to healthcare, the right to treatment when your life is at stake. So let's hold them to account by their own treaties that they support and that they are hired. Let's test them by their own petard. And that's what this bill seeks to do. It seeks to say, international obligations on the rights of a child and the right to life. And yet we're not upholding them, and it's systemic. So that's why this bill is important. I just want to say about Alex Antic. When I first spoke about this bill in Parliament, Alex actually phoned me up and he said, we need to talk about this, George, because this is a fantastic bill. And I said, well, I haven't spoken this next week or whatever. I'm going to be giving a speech in the Federation Chamber on it. And Alex said, they let me know before we did the speech. So I gave him a hurry, about 15 minutes before I was up or something like that. And, he wandered in, and it's quite unusual to see a senator in the sort of House of Representatives session. But he wandered in, he sat at the back, right behind me, proudly, so that he could be in the shot, nodding and supporting as I essentially introduced this bill to the House. So he's been with me all the way on this, and that's why I'm very pleased that he and Matt Canavan and others have picked it up and have run with it now. And it's very important because if we are to get this bill through good, it's a very clean task, right, to get this bill on the private members bill. But if we are to push back against the onslaught of pro-abortion legislation, pro-abortion policies that has plagued this country over the last decade, we've got to do something like this, which is a pushback, which is a fight back. Because I don't know about you and the other participants in the Zoom call, but I'm sick of being on the receiving end of this argument. I'm sick of babies being on the receiving end of this argument. I'm sick of being on the back foot. I'm sick of life being on the back foot. And it's time we took the front foot. And so bills like this and other bills which seek to push back against the culture of death that is inherent in the abortion industry, these are the bills that are actually going to win the day for us ultimately. So, and win the day for babies. Yep. It's not about us, it's about the babies. So with those words, I hand back to you, Greg. Salute you for your service and salute also the great Senator Alex Antic for his service and everything that he's doing in the cause of freedom, liberty and life.
Thank you, George. Look, I'm going to go to Senator Alex Antic now. Could you have a look at your audio in the meantime, please, George, again? privately and then just see if the connections are right. What I want to show you is everybody to have a look at the fact that the recent, if you're all familiar with US politics, Florida State Committee passed a bill banning abortions on unborn babies with beating hearts. And that's a wonderful achievement in the US. And I think the bill proposed by Alex and Matt and Ralph really mirror images almost what's happening in Florida. So there are wins happening and we can see changes happening. The actual bill, if I'm correct, Alex, is it's the Human Rights Children Born Alive Protection Bill 2022. And I'll just read it out, but I'll let you expand on it. The bill clarifies that children born alive are persons. It requires health practitioners to provide medical care, treatment, and statistics on children born alive as a result of termination, and provides that the mother of a child born alive is not liable to prosecution for an offence in respect of that child. Alex, over to you, and if you could share with us the contents of the bill. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And I hope you can hear me reasonably well there. It's probably a bit echoey.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I'm sorry about that. But just I'd start off by saying that from a personal point of view and from the country's point of view, it's a really it's a big loss to have lost George from the Parliament. George had been in Parliament a lot longer than I had, but he was certainly someone that I watched from a distance and thought this bloke's got a bit of get up and go and a bit of fight. And when I got there, I was lucky enough to spend 3 years in the same party room as him, and I was impressed every day with the sort of fight that we saw. And this bill, I think, was probably one of the earliest explanations of that or indications of that for me. It sort of culminated by way of history at around the time where here in South Australia we had a late-term abortion bill which had come before the South Australian Parliament. I know in other jurisdictions have had similar pieces of law passed or debated at least, and so it was a pretty sensitive subject for many of us and for me personally, but also for a lot of people here in SA. And there was, I guess, the timing was interesting in that sense that it was a very kind of topical subject. We had some groups that were campaigning fairly heavily against it. Love Adelaide, of course, Jodie Pickard and others who do great work down here. And I know they'd been speaking to George about this particular bill and what a sort of important piece of legislation it was. So it came on the radar for me, and I approached George and I said, well, I think this is fantastic. And I'd read it, and it was I guess something that was always on the radar. But as with everything with these private members' bills and now private senators' bills, they're very hard to get moving. And so I know George tried very hard to move this along through the House of Representatives, but we had a blockade. There's only a certain amount of time that gets given to the House and to private members' bills. The tragedy of it is that this wasn't afforded the time to actually be debated. So. But what I heard, and really, I must say, I do feel like a little bit of an imposter on this bill, because really the credit has to go to the Queenslanders, to George and to Matt. George for originally having the bill conceptualised and drafted, and then now to Matt to honouring it and reintroducing it through the Senate. So for those who are listening, that there are two different mechanisms that you can be introduced bills. Most commonly, they're introduced by the government of the day. But in both houses of Parliament, that is the lower house, the House of Representatives, and the Senate and the upper house, there's the opportunity there for brave private members and senators to bring these things through. They're not always popular. They're not always with the tone of the day, and they often cut against the grain of the party position. I don't think necessarily that's the case here, but certainly credit has to go to George for doing that. So, Matt, when I heard he was reintroducing it, I simply said, look, I'd like to be a part of that because I had that background with George. And it is, as George describes, a very, very important piece of legislation. And on the back of, as I said, the termination of pregnancy bill here in South Australia, the late term abortion to birth bill, which passed, tragically, I say, 2 years ago. One of the things that was achieved through the pushback of some of the advocacy against the bill was that we were able to, in the state parliament here in South Australia, add some protections for children born alive. And that is the case in some jurisdictions. So it's been said to me, why are you bothering with this when this protection already exists in your home state? Well, the answer to that, of course, is that it doesn't in other states, and that Australian children are Australian children and deserve the dignity of being protected, and indeed this positive obligation being put on medical practitioners to actually render assistance. I must admit, it was for the longest time that I wasn't even aware that this practice went on. I have to say, I'm ashamed to say that I didn't even realise that, and in fact, this stories of children being born alive and simply being left, in many cases in a kidney tray just to simply, expire, have been told at the Walk for Life in Adelaide here and other set of circumstances. And I think part of the problem is that many Australians simply don't know that's the case. To date, when I raise this bill with people that don't have a background in it, they don't believe me. They don't believe me that this is still the case. And I think George did some research, or commissioned some research out of the Parliamentary Library, which, and he can correct me here if I'm wrong, but found that between three-year period, I think 2016 to 19 or thereabouts, there was something in the order of 30 babies, I think either in both Victoria and Queensland or one of, sort of almost is a moot point, that were left, we believe, to die with no medical care rendered. So this practice absolutely goes on. And it is something that, given the benefit of federal intervention, and there are powers, as George said, with the treaty obligations he's described, for the federal parliament to intervene and to provide this sort of cover fire, what we get is, even in states like South Australia where there is protection, Queensland and Victoria where there is not, the Federation would cover off on that and provide some cover fire for babies born alive. As to the status of it, look, I think we're very realistic about the prospects, and Senator Canavan's talked about it before as to the likelihood of success. Well, look, I think we have to be realistic about it. We have to get it through the Senate to start off with, and I expect we'd get a lot of support from our side of the chamber, but I suspect we'd get very little from Labor and the Greens, somewhat tragically. So I think the prospects have to be tempered a little bit here. I don't know that we are expecting huge things out of that, but what Senator Canavan has masterfully done, as he always does, is enabled this to go off to a Senate committee, which means that people get the opportunity to talk about it, to have a report drafted by the Senate committee, and for submissions to be put to the committee and talked about. So I think half the time that's the majority of the battle. And starting with the courageous position that George had of introducing it now to Matt and myself and Ralph Babbitt, continuing it and giving it life, we've sort of edged it closer. People are still talking about it, and it's giving the people out there an opportunity to talk to the Parliament and talk to their politicians about it, to raise it in email form, to raise it with their MPs, and to talk about it and raise awareness apart from anything else. Because, what I've found over the course has been that Parliaments love to just turn a blind eye to these and deal with other nonsensical things that really don't make a difference, when this must surely be one of the most important things that we could possibly be talking about: children's lives. I mean, it's staggering that we even have to talk about it, but here we are. So look, I'm a bit tempered in my expectations, but very, very grateful that we're getting the chance to talk about it, and very grateful to get the chance to talk about it tonight as well. I really do thank you and Family Voice for the opportunity to do that, and I hope that people continue to to talk to their MPs and continue to make sure that we raise the awareness on this issue. We will break through one day. I hope it's sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, we need parliamentarians everywhere that are prepared to float the issues.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. That's a good summary. Before I get back to George, a quick question for you, Alex, is really the problem is sometimes the enemy is not opposite you; it's behind you. What kind of support are you getting from your leaders? Because I know I did a petition.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
not sometimes.
I mean, I wrote to both Mr. Dutton and Mr. Littleproud and asked them to support your bill, Matt's bill, and because I think it's critical that your own party supports what you're doing. What's the situation there at the moment, Alex? And then I'll go to George.
Well, I think, look, I think there are, of course, there are divergence of views inside any party and any coalition, and there would be here, I'm sure. I think, and Matt can probably tell us this when he turns up, but I'm absolutely certain he raised it in party room discussions, and I don't recall there being much pushback. Having said that, that doesn't necessarily mean that the party has formed a view at this stage anyway, to the extent that I'm aware. I guess that the process would be that they would wait for a report to be drafted, and then it would come back and be introduced, and a decision would be made then. But look, I mean, I'd be hopeful. I really can't see how, there is much scope to push back on this. We're not talking about a situation where there's a positive obligation put on the mother to keep the child. That's never been suggested. That's, we're not imposing anything on anyone. We're just talking about rendering medical assistance. So, look, I'll be speaking pretty strongly in support of this again. I can't tell you what the official position will be at this stage. No. Maybe Matt can, but I'm not aware.
All right. Thank you, Alex. George, what kind of reaction did you have when you introduced the bill? And I remember meeting with you in Canberra on this. What was the reaction then, George?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Greg. Is that a bit better or not so much?
Fantastic.
Okay. I apologise before. I don't know what happened to the settings, but something went askew on the microphone. Look, the response from some of the colleagues was pretty good. But not everyone, right? Certainly, I went to the Prime Minister at the time and the Health Minister. The Health Minister said he'd look at it, but he never got back to me. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, quite sadly, I mean, this is just a matter of fact, wrote me a letter in which it really didn't proffer anything about the bill, but it went on to say that Australia was proud that it was a defender of reproductive health rights internationally. Now, I got to say that unfortunately that letter was probably at the beginning of the end of my association with the Liberal National Party. I couldn't believe what I was reading, quite frankly. Nonetheless, there's still good people like Alex in it that I do support, Matt Canavan wholeheartedly. But you asked what the reaction was to it, and people might not have heard before with the poor audio, but the reaction from the left was just so schizophrenic. On the one hand, the bill has served no point because there was no children that were born alive as a result of abortions. On the other hand, it was going to force women who had abortions where the abortion failed to raise a child they didn't want. Well, which one was it? Which one was it? And the fact is, we do know that there were children, that there have been, and probably still are children born alive as a result of abortion procedures. I found that data that Alex was referring to, and this is not the full data, this is just 2 states. Between 2005 and 2015, over a 5-year period that was, and this is before Queensland adopted the abortion liberalisation path. So it was before abortion on demand. It was essentially before the advent of late-term abortions becoming a commonality in Queensland. So 2005 to 2015, 204 babies were born alive as a result of abortions in Queensland. In Victoria, in 1 year alone, 2016, 33 out of the 310 babies that were aborted after 20 weeks gestation. That's survivability. That is survivability. 21 and beyond is survivability. They were born alive. And so, this, as I said, happens. And it's not just the case of an individual doctor or, even just every doctor of their own volition saying, oh, well, it was going to be aborted anyway. I'll just discard the baby and not, give it life care, which would be bad enough. But in Queensland, the Department of Health actually has, Greg, I'll just pull it up. They have a guidelines for the clinical termination of a pregnancy, guidelines for abortion for all their medical practitioners.
And in those guidelines, it has a tabular format, and it says, you know, these are the problems that can happen. This is how you troubleshoot, basically. And it's got, this is what it's got written in black and white. If a live birth occurs, that's in one side of the column, that's the problem. You know, it's not really a problem, but that's what they call the problem. And then it's got the solution. Do not provide life-sustaining treatment. Document the time and date of death. So this problem is systemic, and it goes against our obligations under the Convention on the Rights of a Child and the International Conventions on Civil and Political Rights. Article 6 of the Convention of the Rights of a Child says that state parties recognise that every child has the inherent right to life. It goes on to talk about providing healthcare to ensure that right to life. So we're not doing it. And anyway, I'll leave it at that because I've said my piece. Hopefully people have heard it the second time round. All I wanted to do is just really congratulate Alex Antic, Matt Canavan and others for bringing the bill forward again. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I'll get back to you in a minute. Alex, just over to you for a moment. I wonder if you can read this little bit here that provides that a mother of a child born alive is not liable to prosecution for an offence in respect of that child. Was this an issue before, or is this a specific portion that or was it originally in George's bill? I'm not sure. Could you just expand on that for me, Alex?
Yeah, well, look, it is. I mean, this is just a replication. As I said, I feel like a little bit of an imposter taking any credit for this. This is all George's work, and then in turn Matt for returning it to a different part of the Parliament. But look, I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't believe that there was ever an issue of prosecution for the mother. But I think, as I said earlier, and as George tried to highlight there as well, they're really. I think the bill has gone to great lengths, and the explanatory documentation has gone to great lengths to point out that there is no obligation placed on the mother. There is no offence created by the mother in these circumstances, and really all we're talking about is rendering, you know, assistance or, you know, medical assistance to a child that's born alive. So look, I don't think that was ever the case. I mean, you know, there was. You know, part of the problem here is, and it is a problem, is that these procedures are not considered to be anything other than a medical procedure. There is no criminal, you know, offence that ties to it. It's simply just you know, that in this case you know, that there's a positive obligation on life rendering care. So look, no, I don't know. Perhaps George has got a bit more clarification on that, but I don't know that was ever an issue prior to this bill.
Thank you, Alex. George.
Alex is certainly right. I should say Senator Antic is certainly right. Section 12 of the original Act titled Mother of Child Born Alive Not Liable to Prosecution, and it basically said that no section of the Act would make the mother of a child born alive liable to be prosecuted for an offence in respect of that child. But I got to say kudos to whoever put that in the summary, because again, the fake news media spun that's what they spat out. You know, oh, this is an attempt to prosecute doctors and mothers once again for abortion. Well, no, actually, you know, the doctors would be prosecuted if they did not give life-giving care to a child that was viable, but mothers would not be liable for prosecution. And it's good to highlight that because it stops any argument against it. It really does.
Thank you, George. I wonder, Alex and George, I mean, there may have been a lost opportunity. Now, I'm going to be a bit cheeky here, but I wonder if it's a possibility here to look at this little phrase here. There we go. Born alive as persons. Alex and George, we could have put in there born alive as male or female. And then we could put it into legislation in that sense, and there would be no arguments to it. I wonder if there's a possible amendment coming up there, or what are your thoughts on that? I know you've got persons, but wouldn't it be great if we could put male or female in there? Any comments on that, please, George, first?
I should defer to Alex because it's now his bill. But, the reality is that you can't be born anything else. That's pretty much it. No matter what they say, when they dig our bones up 1,000 years from now, they're not going to say, "Oh, wow, we found a transgender person."
Correct.
It's not going to happen.
Not going to happen. Alex, I wonder if there's an opportunity there, or is it meant, or was it deliberately left out? Or
well, I would. I mean, far be it from me to ever introduce an amendment to, George or Matt's bill, to be honest, and make it more explicit. I mean, that would be, taking the solid conservative approach and making it more solid, which I thought was impossible, frankly. But the reality is we have to try and find out what a woman is. We don't know. I mean, nobody seems to be able to answer that question anywhere around the country. So it's a bit sort of trite to suggest that we would do anything other than say persons. But it's interesting. I assume that probably is a product of some parliamentary draftsperson, man or woman, coming up with that, and it just
Correct.
entering the lexicon more than anything. It's probably one of those little oversights. Honestly, I have to say this just as a side note, and George, I wore this more than anybody, I suppose, over the years, but that parliamentary building is one of the strangest places you will ever meet. You have to suspend reality when you walk in there. Somebody described it here, an independent member in South Australia described the South Australian Parliament as like opening the doors of Narnia. And I reckon that's about right. I used to say it was like a concrete reinforced bubble where the real world dare not enter, but I think the doors of Narnia are probably better. And the use of persons and any other 100 different things we could tell you about that just don't make any sense in the real world. That's part of the course, sadly.
Yeah. So the reason I asked that question before about the prosecution of the mother is we've got one particular person asking here that the mother could well have been an accessory to murder, for example, and I think that was the concern by both, health practitioners and I guess mothers, but I can understand that's critical that you put that in there. And I think mothers would have been reluctant in some cases to, avoid having to be prosecuted or to be accused of any illegal act. So that was the purpose of asking it. The next question really is, now I want to get down to the nitty gritty. George, you said you spoke to the Prime Minister then. Did you speak to any other parliamentary colleagues of a higher, like the Treasurer or, somebody? I mean, I'm trying to get the mood, George, as to, because you were very strong in the bill, and I haven't spoken to Matt or Alex yet, but were there parliamentarians that were saying, George, I can't support you publicly, but I'll support you privately? I mean, it's critical that you get your parliamentary colleagues behind you if this is going to work, George. Oh, yes, sorry, at the time that you were there. Yeah.
Well, of course, I've outlined what I went to the Prime Minister with. I also went to the Health Minister, as I said. And, it sort of, I got platitudes, but it fell on deaf ears. I went to the then Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormick. He told me he would be supportive of something like this, but also said that he did not think that other colleagues within the government would go for it. And when he was replaced by Barnaby Joyce, I also had Barnaby saying that he would be supportive of it. Of course, there was people like Senator Canavan, Senator Antic, and others who were supportive. Member for Kennedy, Bob Catter, was very supportive. In fact, I'm just trying to remember what happened there. So the bill just lapsed. It had a seconder, and the seconder, sadly, has now left the Parliament, and that was Vince Connolly. He was the member for Stirling, if I'm not mistaken, which I'm pretty sure that seat was abolished. So he is no longer in the Parliament, but Vince, a Liberal MP, seconded this. So it had, two government backbenchers moving and seconding it. And I think Bob Catter tried to second it, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So, you know, there was support for it. But, you know, you need the government of the day to actually, in the House of Representatives anyway, I don't know what happens in the Senate, you need the government of the day to allow the bill to be debated and brought on for a vote in order for that to happen, you know. So, you know, and that didn't happen. Quite frankly, it didn't happen. And if I go back to the point that I made earlier, I mean, here I had a letter from the Prime Minister about my bill, basically saying, oh, this is the remit of the Health Minister. But by the way, as a country, we're very proud of the fact that we are a strong supporter of reproductive health rights internationally. I guess that meant that he was against it, and the government was against it. So I didn't. It wasn't forthcoming. But given that, you know, the Liberal National Coalition's in opposition now, it might be interesting if this actually gets to a vote on the floor of the Senate. I'm not sure whether it will. Alex might be able to elaborate on that. And he might also be able to elaborate, because I'd be interested in doing it, as to whether or not submissions will be called upon for this inquiry that might happen into the bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, look, I'll just touch on that briefly. Look, we'd be certainly pushing for it to come to a vote. There's no question about that. I actually think submissions have come and gone and have closed on that bill, and we may be approaching, Matt could correct me on that, but we may be approaching the reporting date fairly soon as well. So there'll presumably be hearings in the next little period, and you know, we'll see what comes of it after that. But yeah, look, I mean, these things, you know, in the Senate, they're afforded a certain amount of time. I'm not aware of a huge backlog of private senators' bills. I've got a couple. I think Matt and I have got, and Ralph again have got another one relating to discrimination in relation to COVID-19 vaccination, which is another one that's coming through. I'm working on a couple of others, I might say, which I think, George, you'll like some of these, just if it's nothing just for your own sport, but some really important things to do with education as well. So, but other than that, there's not a massive backlog. You know, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful we can push it along and use a bit of time. There've been other instances of that. In fact, One Nation had a bill, which was, I think, Pauline Hanson's private Senator's bill relating to discrimination on COVID-19 as well, which came through. So they do pop up. We'll certainly be pushing to bring it to the top of the heap.
Now, Alex and George, one of the issues I want to raise with you is, look, I've just become a grandfather, and I look at my granddaughter and my grandson now, and it's amazing how different you are to your grandchildren than you were to your own children. And I was just thinking, you know, I mean, like it or not, I describe myself as being pro-life, but I think abortion is not a religious argument as such. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. It is more of about life. Do you believe in life or you don't? Are you pro-life or are you not? The question I have for you is that presumably these mothers that have an abortion and the baby survives, the options for that baby are a number, and I would suggest, and please help me out here, palliative care perhaps, adoption, whatever. Is there a follow-up to this bill in terms of what may or may not be suggested to the newborn baby from an abortion? Alex or George? Yeah. George, you kick it off for me. Yeah. Mute. Yep. You're muted, George.
Could you just repeat the question, the key question?
Yeah, look, after a baby is born from an abortion and it's alive, it's got a heartbeat, the option for that baby is palliative care or adoption or what have you. But what are the suggested solutions to that baby that's been born and that the mother doesn't want? You know?
Yeah. This was one of the things that was thrown at us, that if the baby is born alive, then you're basically forcing it on a parent or parents that don't really want it. Well, that's not the case. Tell me what happens, Greg, in the case of a woman who has a baby and then simply says, I don't want it, because that happens. That that has to happen. We know that happens by the fact that there are so many children in state care that go in and out of foster homes. So the answer is foster care, and what the answer should be is adoption. But sadly, we've got it's improving, but only slightly, but we've got a system in Australia that really doesn't like adoption. They prefer these kids going in and out of foster homes rather than having that security, because there's always the thought that, oh, they might reconcile with their biological parents, where in some cases that is not going to happen. So the bill will do nothing of the sort in terms of foisting an unwanted child on a parent. It will simply, if a baby was born of an abortion and was provided medical care, survived and lived, that baby would go into the normal care arrangements that the state imposes in other situations where a child is not wanted or a child is taken from a parent because they can't look after them. So that's what would happen, Greg.
I know with the Florida bill that I referred to earlier, the intention there is that there will be quite a strong palliative care campaign, promoted with it. So that's interesting to note. Alex, what's your comment on the fact that, what does happen to the baby after an abortion, in terms of the mother not wanting it or whatever the case may be, Alex?
Yeah, I think George has summed it up perfectly. I mean, this is literally, no different to the way it would have been had a mother given birth to a child that they weren't intending to keep in any event, I would say. And it would vary a little bit to state, I expect. But it is important to point out that, as George said, in addition to the issue of the prosecution portion of that, this was also clearly outlined that there wasn't any positive obligation on the mother to keep the child. You simply, there is no ability to do that. That simply couldn't be the case, as tragic as that is. So look, no, I would expect that the intention would be that the child would be adopted out or put into state care, as the case may be. None of which are optimal, but of course all are better for standing for life than for for the alternative. So that's just an unavoidable reality of the situation.
Yeah, I did some checking up, and I found that the queue for adopting babies is quite long. There is a long queue, and the process to be vetted is very stringent. So there are some measures in place, but yeah, the adoption queue is very long. So there's always an option there. The question I have for you is to get a parliamentary bill through. And I remember in my days when working for a minister in Canberra, you had to lobby your colleagues, you had to lobby the industry. What can people do to help this bill get through, Matt, first? Alex, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Well, look, I think the same things that are always important, which are contacting your local member and even the senators in your state as well. The MPs' offices are bombarded with correspondence. Much of it is, rote emails, which are campaign emails, which come through. I always think it's important for people to write a letter, in the printed form. I know that when people do that to me, it is, powerful in the sense that you can't just flick a rote email back and everyone's kind of, yelling at each other in a sort of a disparate way. You really have to take the time to create a response. So I think that's always effective. The same old things, of course, people getting to their member and speaking to them. And look, I have to say that the longer game in this, frankly, is getting involved in the political process. I have to say, I've sort of been encouraging this as a result of the termination of pregnancy bill here in South Australia. I've been encouraging people to join a political party and get involved, and the access that then gives you to your local MP, and the fact that you're voting in their pre-selection potentially as well, makes your voice even louder. I just think the more people we've got that share these values, that are actually involved in the machinery of politics, the more likely we are to pre-select people, like George, like Matt, like Ralph, to go to Parliament, and we therefore don't have to lobby about these issues. You know, if we've got people in there that already share these values, then you don't have to write another letter in your life, because you know that they're going to take that to Parliament. That's the long-term game as well. So in the meantime, certainly contacting officers, speaking, writing, going and meeting with your MP, they're always going to be important, and they always should be. And also speaking to other people about it. I think one of the problems we've had, certainly in terms of the late-term abortion bill here in South Australia, but also this as well, is that people just don't believe that it happens. They simply don't believe that it happens. To this day here in South Australia, when I talk to people who accuse me of being, you know, some crazed lunatic for taking the positions that I've taken in relation to that bill, they don't believe me that a mother can terminate a pregnancy up until the day of birth. So I think the same is true of this. People simply don't believe that medical practitioners can, in some states, leave a baby simply to expire, I think, and it is unbelievable.
Yeah, both George and Alex, I do a lot of speaking engagements at churches. I want to get back to the argument. Is it a religious question, or is it just a life issue question? For me, it's both, because I'm a pro-life and a Christian, and so I take a biblical worldview, but that's not everybody's, you know, viewpoint. And I suspect that, you know, politicians would rather hear a non-biblical view rather than a you know, a sort of a secular view. Sort of what I'm trying to get at is that should people make it a biblical issue or just a pro-life issue in your experience as a politician, George?
I think it's horses for courses, Greg. Of course, if you're talking with people who hold the Christian faith, there is the reminder that needs to be given about the Christian position on this issue. But you are also correct in that for those who aren't Christian, and even in you know, general discussion, this doesn't have to be a religious-based argument. The fact is, I mean, let me give you one that goes around. It's a great one. I mean, what's the fine if you climb up in a tree and you grab a wedge-tailed eagle's egg and you crack it in the ground? You know, what's the fine that happens when you do that? I'm going to tell you, it's pretty severe, actually. It's pretty severe. So, Pangatic, how can we fine people for cracking the unborn child of an eagle and think that that is a crime and that is a punishment, that there needs to be a punishment applied, but at the same time we say, thumbs up, guys, you can actually go ahead and kill your human baby right up until the day before it's born, because that's what the laws actually say now. You can go and do it. You know, yeah, we can talk about, oh, they've got all these loopholes and all these sort of guidelines that you have to go through, you know, 2 doctors. But at the end of the day, it's simply, the law simply allows people to abort children right up to the moment of birth, actually. You know, it could be a couple of hours before birth and you could still do it. Heaven forbid that would ever happen, but the laws actually allow it. So there is this great inconsistency at play here. A life is a life is a life is a life. If it's not a human life, then tell me, what is it? And so that's a simple non-religious argument.
Look, you make a good point, George, because one of the arguments I've had in this particular instance, the Labor Party, who were meant to be sort of from a foundation of Catholic, you know, ideology, Catholic upbringing, and of course, what the Catholics believe in generally, pro-life. And yet you've got Labor Party members voting for abortion bill, euthanasia bill, and what have you. So it really is contradictory. But I mean, you've got them on the coalition side as well. Don't get, you know, don't be mistaken. But Alex, for you, what persuades you most? A pro-life argument or a Christian argument, a biblical worldview? What sort of moves you in particular as a politician?
I think they're really very difficult to detangle, I think, untangle, I suppose is the word. You know, mainly because our values are based on our Judeo-Christian heritage, and you know, so they are almost one in the same in this instance. But I do know a lot of people, you know, several people I can think of off the top of my head who would probably never set foot inside a church in their life that still think that this is, you know, the sorts of things we've described this evening to be abhorrent. So I don't think they have to necessarily be faith-based or Christian or religious in any sense. I think there are just people out there who understand what we're saying, which is simply that, you know, this is sort of unconscionable. It's, you know, really on a human level, on a base grade human level, it's hard to see anyone that's really anything other than with the blinkers on that thinks that this is okay. So look, I don't know. I don't think this has to be categorized, and I think it's probably helpful that it's not in many ways. I think the more people that, because of course the stigma out there is that all of us that believe in this are just crazy, you know, church-going, you know, types. I think that you know, that's of course wrong. I mean, that's just not the case. But I do think that you know, there's a genuine human element to this which transcends religion, it transcends politics, it transcends, you know, all of the above. And so, you know, I think it's just a simple value statement. It is. I mean, the example George makes about the wedge-tail eagle is a really, you know, it is a really accurate one in the sense that we you know, we almost have more penalties on, you know, destroying native flora and fauna than we do on these sorts of things. So that's where we've got to as a society. How we've got there, well, look, there's another day for another thesis. The long march through the institutions, I suppose, is as culpable as anything. But you know, it's important that we've got people in Parliament that continue to push back on this stuff, because you know, the march is on, and it's all of it is a bit disturbing.
Thank you, Alex. Look, I don't want to make it personal, but I remember, well, I've got 3 lovely children, grown up adults now. I've got, well, almost adults. They never seem to grow up. They always want money from you or something, you know. The point I want to make is that when we lost our first child through miscarriage, I felt we had lost a life, and we did. And it was just a miscarriage, and it was sad. We had a name, we had everything. And to me, and it's a personal view, as I said, but to me, that was a life that had gone missing. And it's something that I think resonates more when you actually see a baby being born and left on the table to die or whatever. So this bill is very important, is what I'm saying. In summation, I'm not sure what happened to Matt and Ralph there. As I mentioned to those that may have just joined me, they are both at a function. Matt Canavan had to go to a funeral, which he's speaking at, so he profusely apologised. And Ralph is also at a function that he has to speak at, but they said they would come on board if they can before 8 p.m. But just, it looks like we're going to run out of time, but just to sum up, George, when you originally made this bill, did you have the context all ready to go and give it to the drafting people at Parliament, or you know, or did they choose the words? I'm just wondering how much influence, you know, the bureaucracy had on what your intention of the bill was originally.
We have in the Parliament, well, in the House of Representatives, we have with the clerks, bill drafters, the Parliamentary Council, I think we call them. And so I went to them with a proposal with some examples from other jurisdictions, and they just simply went away, had a look at what I had written down as to the kind of bill I wanted drafted and what was in it, and they had a look at the other jurisdictions' legislation, and they came back with a series of questions. So it's actually a pretty good way of doing this, because you know, I'm not sure whether you're a lawyer in past life, Alex, but I certainly wasn't. So, you know, I don't know how to write legalese, but I certainly know what's common sense and what was intended with this bill. But they come back with a series of questions, you answer them, and then they can go away from that and actually draft the bill. So, and look, you know, aspects that they might come back that say, hey, look, we need to just check this section with you because we weren't sure, we put it in there, and you can say, no, I want that taken out. So at the end of the day, yes, the wording was done by the Parliamentary Council, but I literally approved every single line and clause in that bill. There was not one clause or section therein that that didn't have my approval.
Yeah. Now, the reason I'm asking that for is because, Alex, what will happen, I can guarantee you, is when you start defending the bill before Parliament, there are going to be a host of amendments come up. To what degree are you prepared to accept amendments, in the sense that you don't want to lose the intention of the bill? Alex, can you just briefly comment on that for me?
Yeah, look, I guess, Greg, it depends on what they are. I mean, you know, you can well expect, I'd imagine, a lot of watering down from the Greens prior to even getting to the point of voting for the substantive bill or not. But and look, it really depends. I would imagine that, you know, this is the actual guts of this bill is relatively straightforward, in the sense of, you know, there aren't many operative parts to the bill, so it'd be hard to see how this bill would be amendable by, you know, the Australian Greens Party to make it anything other than appalling to them. They don't support this sort of work historically, and I can't see how they would here, unless it was something mischievous and malicious in order to try and turn it into a positive negative or something like that. We've seen that before, of course, you know, trying to turn it on its ear. So it's hard to know what those amendments would be. Sometimes, you know, there are deals done to try and water things down a bit, but really this is kind of an almost all or nothing type scenario, where, you know, the medical practitioners, there's a positive obligation to render assistance or not. I suppose there could be, you know, parameters put around that, but ultimately it's all or nothing from where I sit. You know, but I mean, look, if there was something there that, and you know, this would be a matter for Matt and Ralph, of course, as well, but if there was something in there that managed to get this through in some capacity, we're here to protect lives, not to sit on the you know, the altar of ego on this one, I can tell you.
All right. Well, look, gentlemen, we have come to almost 8 o'clock, and I apologise for both Matt and Ralph. I know that they both genuinely wanted to come on board, but as I said, Matt was at a funeral. Can I just say that, would you be, both of you, I want to thank you very much for giving us a background to the bill. It will become, I think in July, there will be something coming out from Parliament. What we want to be able to do is be able to contact you in particular, Alex and Matt, and of course, George is always available for support. And George, I've got to tell you, you're looking really well, mate. And so well done. So can I just say, on behalf of Christian Voice Australia, and from a biblical perspective, I think this is a wonderful bill. It's a much needed bill. And not only that, it's a practical bill. It's a common sense bill that needs to be considered by Parliament from a pure pro-life point of view. Gentlemen, on behalf, as I said, of all our supporters and the people that joined us here tonight, thank you very much for being with us, and I will be in touch at a later time. This has been recorded, and I will share it with all our people. I've got I think I have about 100 people that want a copy of the video once it's finished, so I'll be sending it to them. So thank you very much for those who are on board. I appreciate your participation. Thank you, Senator Antic, and thank you, former MP George Christensen. I appreciate your time, and God bless you both. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Greg.
Good night.